Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nika Sherrill, and this is the ItCast Real Talk on Sex. The ItCast is our community outreach podcast that aims to increase diversity in conversations on health and sexuality. Go. Through this work, we are creating a world where all people feel loved, honored, and respected. So just a few announcements before we dive in. The Global Sexual Health and Freedom Summit is happening this weekend, starts tomorrow, so go ahead and get your tickets today. The Global Sexual Health and Freedom Summit creates a safe space where all people come together. We will embrace humanity, diversity, and the liberation of sexual health globally. Join us for this powerful event. You can visit our website at sexhealthsummit.com and use offer code NC10 to get 10% off your checkout. That's the letter N, the letter C, and then 10. All right. Also, do support the ItCast and all of our work by visiting theitcast.com. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and share with your community. So this episode, as a trigger warning, may contain some sexually sensitive topics. We request that you be mindful of yourself and your needs throughout listening, and do not listen if it will bring up some concerns. This week's topic is real talk. Consent is not black and white. So really excited about this conversation. Today in the booth, we have Bridget Ryan. She is a coach, organizer, and activist who dedicates her life to creating safer, more equitable spaces for self-expression and people of all bodies. Welcome, Bridget. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you, Nika, and thank you so much for having me. And let me just say, I appreciate the fact that you put a content warning. I don't see that enough, and that was really powerful. Just as a reminder, because it also creates space for myself as somebody to kind of dig into some stuff, because I know that people are aware of the sensitive nature of the content. So I just wanted to say thank you for starting that out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really taking care of the community, it gives us the space because there's a lot in this conversation. It is deep. And it really takes something, I think, to stand at the edge of making a difference for people, especially in the realm of sexuality. It's confronting. People get a little concerned about it. So to make it as easy as possible. So what brings you to the show?
Gosh, so a beautiful story. I think we have such a beautiful story, Nika. I got connected with Nika through a mutual friend of ours. I had kind of called out to the universe to be a much bigger part of this conversation. As Nika mentioned, for the last about 2 years, I've been running an erotic or co-founding. I certainly do not run the thing by myself. So let me be very clear about that. But was a co-founder of an erotic immersive arts community that really centered around events and transformative experiences, and using theatrics and play as an entryway to transformation and to going deeper, and really trying to challenge a little bit of the sex party community to be not just about sex. Hence the not just sex stuff, and really about love and intimacy and vulnerability. And in doing that, and with the body I hold and the privilege that comes with that, it's really been the learning has been centered around how do we actually start to take a look at and become aware of and challenge our own ways of operating in our own systems, and the ways in which they impact our desires and our wants. And through that avenue, it's really brought me here to these sort of conversations that are centered around how do we make this safe for everyone? And in order to do that, we have to have uncomfortable conversations around who it is not safe for and why. And I really felt that immediately when you and I connected. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think we're going to be able to get into some good stuff here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for your work in the world. It is, what I'm hearing is that it's an opportunity to shift the paradigms and transform the way that people experience sexuality and actually like their self-expression. Like
Mhm.
there's so much that you get to dive into. And when you mention like theatrics and play, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, what I find, and the reason that this theatrical approach came on was because when we see, right, in this world, we see aliases. It's not an uncommon thing. It's really common actually for people to almost embody altered egos when they step into this erotic space. It allows us some permission to integrate parts of ourself that we might otherwise want to distance, or so, because of social constructs and because of life experiences, we learn that we have to dissociate a little bit from that part. And that part is so core and so true to who we are. And so I often say, Professor Playtime, which is one of my aliases, like, I don't know what she's up to. Bridget would never do those things. She would never. But Professor Playtime, I don't know. She's crazy. Watch out for her, and it's jokingly, right, and borderline of problematic dissociation. But if we're aware of it and we're conscious of it and we allow for that expression, we really saw people, come to life in this theatrical space, because it really did allow them permission to try on different hats that, Bridget never would have. But this character I'm playing in the superhero world, they might.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned it's very common, and I completely agree with that. Like, to be completely honest, Nika Sherrill was like my opportunity to step so powerfully into what I'm doing. And I'm like, Nika does things Marnika doesn't do. Like she's out there, she's excited, like getting into everything in this space. And I won't say that I'm completely reserved, but I will say that it was like a disconnect from how I thought I was supposed to be.
Supposed to.
I know, right?
Oh gosh, I felt that in my body when you said it, truly, because that right there is at the cusp of what I'm hoping to just scratch the surface of, if I'm doing something right in the world, is what we are supposed to do, supposed to be, supposed to feel. Where does that come from? And when you really start to dig into where those come from, it's pretty uncomfortable. and it's sad, and it's painful, and it's really disruptive. Like, I will say right now, it is a lot easier to blindly operate under the constructs, right? The coding that we've been taught. This is what I like. This is what I do. This is how I go. This is how I dress. And I still participate in it, right? I was worried about my hair this morning. I put on makeup. I participate in these systems. But the first step to being able to not be a passive person in those systems is be conscious, challenge those things, bring it to the surface. Do not just be a passive like, if you're passively operating, chances are you're probably harmful to yourself or to others subconsciously.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that supposed to element of it really drives a lot of shame and a lot of fear and a lot of self-hatred, and really being able to come full circle and accept the self and begin to merge those realities is really powerful.
Yeah, the shame as a complex is something that I study quite a bit. And truly, as a complex meaning, right, this thing that once it's presented, it sort of just becomes self-fulfilling. Like, it's almost like once it's present, it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper and almost spirals. And shame as a complex is a really important thing for us to look at when we're talking about desires, and certainly when we're talking about relational situations and the erotic, the sensual. I lost my train of thought there.
No worries. No worries. The erotic, the sensual, shame.
Shame is a complex.
Yes.
So when we start to take a look at, right, like, if we know in our core that there's certain things that arise, these wants and these needs, they're deep inside of us and we feel them. But when we have a surrounding that we automatically, as humans, right, we're validating our understanding of reality, especially when we're younger. What's going on in our body, and how does that compare to our understanding of the world around us? And if our attachment figures, if social representations, if we don't have the support systems or the examples for a wide spectrum of experiences at different timelines, in different ways, like then shame becomes the core of what so many of us hold at like the base of our growth and foundation. And that, I mean, for me, it caused years and years and years of pain to myself and to others. And I'm still quite sensitive to, I can feel my body react when I feel as if someone is speaking or using terms that might be shaming someone's expression, even subconsciously, right? We don't want to yuck anybody's yum is what you'll hear a lot in this world. And that's just so important because shame is something we carry for a really long time. And it's a silent killer, right? Like you might not know that exists inside of somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a silent killer. And like the number of times that I've talked to people who are going through shame around sexuality, identity, like so many things. And they're like, I was planning on killing myself. Like that is a very real thing. And people don't talk about it. You know, we talk about, oh, like depression and suicide, but we don't talk about shame and what that looks like.
Shame in the sense of, how it shows up for each individual person, I think, is so unique, and I think if we are all operating with the awareness and compassion around the shame that somebody may hold and understanding that you might have it's impossible to know the levels of that exist for each person. So the more that we can be aware of and compassionate to the ways in which shame may exist and be aware of the way that we speak about our own wants and needs. There's a quote that's like coming up for me in this, which is detracting me a little bit, but I think it's important. There's a gentleman, Scott Katamas, who's a longtime relationship coach and master love coach. And I was on this journey, right, of self-discovery and finding myself. And I was like, I'm really working on discernment, setting boundaries, and I'm working on discernment. And he said, Bridget, the goal is not just about discernment. The goal is about discernment without judgment. And that sunk in differently for me. That was where I realized that it's not about opposition. It's not about finding my truth so that I can be against someone else's, or like, it's actually about finding my truth and being discerning without there needing to be any assignment to what is or is not good, right, etc. for someone else. Absolutely. And that is, I think, the goal that we should all be focusing on when we're talking about shame is do you, and be very clear and do the work to figure out what that is for you from a centered whole place, and allow space for others to do the same.
Yeah, 100%. So I want us to tackle a bit like the conversation. We laid out consent is not black and white, and there are so many nuances and so many conversations around that. And before I turn it over to you, I really got in the shame conversation that the way we approach consent may actually produce more shame.
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. It is exactly kind of the point that I want to bring up, and why I think it's so important to start with that conversation and like the emotion of it, because we all feel that, right? It's like, oh, we've been there. But yeah, when we talk about the way in which we are engaging around consent, there's layers to it. One of the most important for me to note is that, and that can be a bit controversial, I guess, and you and I talked a little bit about this, because I've been in certain play spaces, and I've even had people in the events that I'm organizing make comments along the lines of, well, it's up to each individual person in this space to own their nose, and it's up to each individual person to take care of themselves. This is true. This is completely true on a blanket level. However, it is also the responsibility of the other individual or individuals that are engaging in some way and requesting a level of vulnerability and intimacy and raw, authentic self. If we are operating under the assumption that everyone is just sort of taking care of self, I don't think that's enough for true consent. I really do believe, and I really support creating containers for where we are having the full, first of all, the full negotiation conversation, which we'll talk a little bit about today, I think, which will dig into where we might be rubbing up on shame and actually blocking off the conversation for one another. So it's starting with understanding, like, being trauma informed, being aware of your own privilege, and being aware of how those constructs might lead into the conversation around the negotiation, and how it might influence somebody's ability to give you a yes or give you a no.
Right. Yeah. And it's so great. I remember when I first introduced the conversation on like pleasure negotiations to my general community, it was like, I've never even heard of that. And it's like, this is something that's so critical. Like, you might not call it that, but having a negotiation and an understanding around what you want, what you need, and, you know, what your limits are is very important. And this is the thing that, like, how do I phrase this? The conversation around yes means yes and no means no is such a blanketed and minimal context of what consent really is. And there are so many things that mean no, that are not no.
And if we aren't talking about it, like if we aren't talking about body language, if we aren't talking about dissociation, like if you're watching someone dissociate, if you don't know, if you're listening, right, or watching, you don't know what it looks like when someone dissociates, pause. Right. And that's an opportunity for education, because that is something that you should be aware of both in yourself and in anybody that you're engaging in this way, and talking about the layers of what can show up without shame. Because it isn't like it can and does happen, which is why there's these frameworks, and there's these tools, and we stress the importance of these conversations, because it can happen. I have been in scenes with people that I have done scenes with 100 times before, but because of I didn't eat enough that day, right? It could be down to something that simple, which impacted my ability to be present, to be aware, and to be functioning fully in my body. And had I not had the opportunity to check in with myself, had I not had the people involved in my experience that were also trauma informed and also aware and also know the checklists of things that we should be talking through, I could have put myself in a situation where I was not 100% embodied in my consent. And that's really what we're talking about here, is I could have easily just said yes, because it would have been something that we had done 100 times before. But we have to be thinking about the layers in which we are able to be 100% present in our bodies. And if we are not able to note when we are disconnecting from that and not in our bodies, I found that that's where we can really get into some trouble. And that's where your partners can be a huge support system if you are really having these conversations thoroughly and effectively before the hormones.
Oh my God. You tapped this very briefly, but I want you to talk about the power of the pause. That was,
Yeah, that's a huge one. And thank you for calling that out. It's something that, truthfully, and if this helps normalize the journey, the art of the pause is not something that was really like drilled into me, my practices personally or externally, until about a year and a half ago. I was so centered around the learning of the yes and the no, and learning the intricacies and nuances of that. But truthfully, what has changed my life, and what I see change the life of other people's regularly, is understanding that, there is so much power in understanding deep, like using your body as an information source to know what is a yes and what is a no, and be able to make those decisions. Like, that is And to be able to recognize when it is not a fully embodied yes or no, and be able to give yourself permission and have the tools and the ability to articulate, it's not a yes and it's not a no. And therefore I am going to press the pause button. And you can apply this in so many facets of your life. We apply it as an organization. We've actually applied it several times as an organization, right? Once when we were brand new and we were growing way too fast, and our community was like, hey, this is really vulnerable and y'all are just throwing randoms in here. Like, this is like, whoa. And so we stopped. And I felt the pressure in that moment to react, to fix, to push forward, to hit deadlines, whatever came up for me from those pressures, and for all of us on the leadership team, of what we were supposed to do, right? Going back to that and really having to pause and go, okay, we don't know what is an embodied yes and embodied no for us. And even though it is so uncomfortable to stop, we have to, right? Because the one or two times where we didn't, and we did just react, quite frankly, out of fear, right? We made mistakes and we hurt more people. And so this applies in our personal and relational lives, particularly when we're talking about negotiation settings. If you're having a conversation around something, and we can talk a little bit about what that might look like, and how to really have the details of what you would need to feel good about that negotiation. But if it is not a yes, it is okay, right, to pause.
Yeah. And I think people really need to get that it is okay. Mm-hmm. I've said yes in situations where it's like, where, I forget what you were saying, but the thought came up for me was like saying yes out of people pleasing, saying yes out of not wanting to disappoint someone, saying yes out of obligation, like these things that in the background, like, there's vulnerability. I know for me, with the disappointment and the people pleasing, there's been fear. Like, I don't want to lose them. I don't want to, feel bad about myself or like whatever. So let me engage in this. And then what I can say is that when it's not an embodied yes, it can feel very empty on the other side.
Can I go a little woo-woo-y on it?
Oh, yes.
Stick with me, people. Okay. So I really believe in, and this is not a personal belief, this is from other teachers as well, is when you go against yourself on that primal level, that emptiness you feel is you're acting out of integrity to yourself. So as bad as it feels when you hurt somebody you love, and because you stepped out of integrity, that you're treating yourself the same, right? You're treating your little inner child or whoever it is at that time, you are telling them that they don't matter as much as that other thing. And that's deep and can have really long-term impact. One of the exercises I do early on with my coaching clients, particularly those that are socialized as men, which I find interesting, that seems to be the most impactful, is going back and identifying moments where they abandoned self and documenting and not, we're not going and trying to bring this stuff up, but just being curious about, what that was and what that felt like, and trying to, bring to light the frequency, first of all, the frequency in which you do that or we have a tendency to do that to self, and how, when we are talking about, like, again, for those who are socialized as women, or certainly for those who are vagina having, where you are welcoming something into your body. And if we're not really thinking about that, right, there's an energetic exchange there. And if you're I don't like to use giving away. I think that's so tied in like this old misogynistic understanding of female sexuality. But there's an energetic exchange, and like anything else in life, this one is a little bit deeper, I believe. But like anything else in life, if there is not a reciprocated or authentic exchange of energy, it leaves a little chip on your soul.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Wow. One of the things that popped up, and this is it's not out of left field, it's actually right in alignment. So we were talking about responsibility and
Mhm.
personal agency. And I want to put in that for the person who, like, your partner might be checked out or disassociated or not in the mood at that moment. And for yourself, it's a breach of integrity and consent to push forward with those people because you don't want to violate anyone. I mean, I assume no
Right.
one wakes up like,
And honestly, I'm really glad that you said that. That's a really important point, and truthfully, something I struggled with a bit as a survivor myself. I held a lot of anger,
Mhm.
particularly for those socialized as men. I was, and the more I did, the more I dug into the systems, right, that of oppression that exists that allow for pain, not just to, in my situation, but of all bodies and marginalized communities. I was angry about it. And I think now I have more of an allowance, because the reality is multiple things can be true.
Mhm.
People can mean well. And if anything, that fragility that you're seeing when you call things in or call things out is because they care, which is so interesting. That it isn't most people. There are definitely people out there through trauma that carry different demons, we'll say. But I don't believe that most people walk out the room that day intending to cause lifelong harm to somebody else in there, even if it's a stranger, but certainly not someone they love. And we do it all the time.
All the time. All the time.
But let's just have a conversation about it. Like, let's
Right.
be real about it. Yes, we exist with systems that allow for certain bodies to hurt and harm, and it can be unintentional. Actually, I like to say intention is irrelevant.
Yeah.
Intention is
Right.
completely
Right.
irrelevant. And when you catch yourself going, to explain it, use intention to explain away someone else's hurt, it's irrelevant. Just hear what they're trying to say and create space for the reality that we as humans cannot truly understand and empathize if we're operating through here someone else's lived experience real time, because we are barely scratching the surface of understanding our own, if we're lucky. So just understand that. Understand that other people are carrying these things around with them, and the way in which we engage with them should be very conscientious.
Absolutely. I want to highlight something that you said real quick and then get back to consent. But I love that you said people socialized as female, people socialized as male. And like those, the implications of being raised in those bodies and what that actually creates
Mhm.
is very powerful. We came out of this like binary system of like, you have to be this, you have to be that. And now we're more present to who people really are, like in their hearts, in their souls. It's not about the social construct. So breaking down those stereotypes, socialized as female, socialized as male, is just such a powerful way to contextualize that.
Mhm. And it's really important in the conversation of consent, because we cannot be having conversations of consent, like I said, without an understanding of, or at least a space for, other people's lived experiences. Otherwise, I don't believe it is true consent. I believe it's self-serving, and I believe that it's an unconscious pursuit of self-desire.
Yeah.
So we have to be aware of and having those conversations. Where has, so let's take a real example, right? So I'm sitting down, and let's say I'm having a conversation with a tall white, I'm assuming cis hetero man.
Yeah.
Are we socially, right, on the same playing field? No.
Right.
So let's talk about it, right? Because I have been taught culturally for years that there is a hierarchical power exchange happening here. So unless both parties are extremely conscious of that dynamic, while he is asking me if he's able to tie me up and blindfold me, if we are not aware of those power dynamics and the way in which it might impede my ability to give an enthusiastic embodied yes, it's not consensual.
Absolutely. Oh my, you mentioned earlier, like being angry, and that it brought up something in me. So it was, like I look back at my experiences of being sexually assaulted, and I was angry as fuck too. I was so angry. And what was there for me is I said no. I said, I'm not comfortable with this. And that was not recognized, heard, or respected. And that is why we're having this conversation that consent is not black and white. It's not yes means yes and no means no, because those things don't take us deep enough.
Yeah, quite frankly, they're not enough. I understand why they're instituted, because quite frankly, we need a baseline to start.
Yes. Starting point.
But it's not enough. It's not the end all be all. It's simply not. And where it even becomes more so is where there are situations where you might say yes at first and something changes. Yeah. And that's okay. And no, and yes, and that's where yes and no is not enough. And so one of my favorite resources, one of my favorite like fallback frameworks is the wheel of consent that Betty Martin offers. And we'll make sure we'll include a resource so people can educate themselves further. I highly recommend you institute it in the ways in which you're having conversations with individuals, whether or not it's around your sexuality. But essentially, and I won't go too far into it because I'm not even trained to teach Betty's stuff, but why the wheel of consent is so important and why I bring it up in this conversation is because yes, it touches on the baseline frameworks of this is my desire. Nika, I would really love to lay on your lap and have you play with my hair for a few minutes. And it helps you get comfortable asking for the real, authentic, vulnerable details of what you would like to share in an experience with another person. And that alone is a really powerful framework. Learning how to ask for and articulate in a safe way, and also receive and negotiate in a safe way those wants and desires. It's boom, setting a container, which is arguably the most important part. Can we sit down and bring this stuff to the surface safely and vulnerably? Yeah. But where it goes a layer deeper, and when this was first introduced to me by another master love coach, Trish Wright, and dear friend of mine, she had really called out the specifics of, what it is about this is it's not just about the desires. It's not just about the communication of that desire, but it asks the question, who is this for? And that changed, especially having had my body used in ways that was not for me, right? Right. It's like everything opened up for me. It like this moment of consciousness, this total enlightenment moment where I was like, oh, wow, I'm on this path of revolution thinking that, talking about sex is the work, and realizing, oh my gosh, no, what it is, like the real work in terms of changing the systems and really making it safe for all bodies is to go, who is it for? And what does it mean? And where does it come from? Like, oh, okay, this is it. It's here. I got the tools to talk about it. I have a safe space to talk about it. But I am asking you to do this thing. Is it for me? Am I asking you to play with my hair and behold me because I need to be held right now, because I need that oxytocin? Right. And it's important for me that you know that I'm asking you to do something with, around, my, and your body for me. Right. So that you then can make a conscious decision energetically to be the giver and to be a witness, right? And then ask the same, and just as important, to say no to that. Like it is teaching you to be aware of and have autonomy around your energetic boundaries, both sexually and not, right? It's really more of an intimacy conversation. It's a relational conversation. It is bigger than that.
Yeah. And like, you can't be present, you can't be connected without intimacy. Like that is underneath, like that's what it is.
And sometimes you don't know the answer, right? Sometimes you get to that point of it, right? You write it all down. You've got the, all right, I really want this person. I feel confident. I feel good. I'm all brave. I'm pumping myself up. I'm like, oh, I'm going to ask her. She's going to say no, maybe. And I'm ready for it, right? But then you sit down and go, okay, well, who is this? Who is this for? Mm-hmm. And then the pause has to come in because it sometimes, like I often ask myself, like, is this mine? Right? When I'm doing energetic work, like, is this mine? Am I holding mine right now? Is this actually for me? Or am I people pleasing right now? Is my own expression of desire somebody else's want? It's not even mine, which is not consensual. And when you wake up from that after, and I have been there, I've fully been there. Yeah. It feels empty. It feels icky. And that conversation is uncomfortable and necessary to have afterwards too. I think that's a really important thing to note is consent does not just happen on the front end or during. It actually can happen most powerfully afterwards. Right. In the conversations and the debrief and in the analysis of what came up for self in that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's big. You brought this up earlier and we were talking about men and women on the same playing field. And this is not just, and actually, let me adjust that. People socialize as male, people socialize as female. It's not even just that conversation when we're talking about privilege. And and like, yeah, let's dig into that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, okay. When we're talking about system, the reason I'm so passionate about this particular focus when we're talking about the pathway to liberation, right? And when I say liberation, I mean it in the sense of being able to feel the full expression of yourself in whatever that is, and to be safe and celebrated, right? It might always feel good, it might feel uncomfortable, but to feel safe in your self-expression, and the reason is because I find that these oppressive systems and these structures create an inability for us to deeply, intimately connect in these ways. And when we talk about one, which is why I really think it's so important for each, like the erotic was my inlet to analyzing my white privilege, analyzing my pretty privilege, analyzing my skinny privilege, and how much that has, right? Analyzing that. My pathway was through understanding the ways in which I was oppressed sexually. But I hate to break it to y'all, the minute that you start to uncover those systems of oppression, it's really hard to turn away how deeply they impact like marginalized communities. So this is not just a conversation around men and women. And quite frankly, when we talk about intersectionality, this is an even deeper conversation of someone socialized as a Black woman, someone socialized as a Black queer woman, right? These are real lived experiences that cause trauma, which is why being trauma informed is so important to me in these conversations. And when people are going out and practicing their sexuality, we really got to be aware of the way in which these systems both are internalized and also the way that they may be showing up for other people.
Yeah. Two things on the the pretty privilege and the skinny privilege. Like there are places that like social clubs and groups of people who like you cannot get into if you don't look this way, you're not this tall, you're not this light, your hair's not this straight, like all types of shit. And I'm so sorry. They're creating a whole realm of curated people that they want to be around. And it removes people from the conversation so deeply.
And more insidious, and this might be where we start to push it. I believe that these systems are manicuring people. Oh. They're manicuring people to be traumatized, to be abused. Yeah. And that is the reality. We are being taught that to accept certain things and to shame ourselves and to shame it in other people because we're shaming it in ourselves, and to like, we are being taught essentially in these little ways, and those microaggressions. That one's not even micro, that one's pretty blatant, to accept the abuse that then can come from that down the line. And that's icky. That should make your skin crawl.
100%.
I also think it's important to think about it as, or to talk about it in the form of consent. So when we're talking about the way in which we are taught to value, right? Let's talk about equity within consent.
Mm-hmm.
There are systems that place a value. That's the word choice I want to use there. We place value as a society on certain bodies.
Right.
In doing that, and certain minds, right? I'm neurodivergent. That's something I've struggled with my whole life, right? The world is not designed for me. So there's a whole spectrum. But if we are taking a look at the ways in which these systems of oppression do in fact exist, and the ways in which we are then taught to value or not, quite frankly, others' bodies and opinions, when we look at consent, not just on an relational level, right, where we're empowered and we're having the conversation, but looking at it as a society, right? When we look at Black girls or girls of color, Indigenous people, right, the numbers don't lie, right? And what is done afterwards also doesn't lie. So when we're talking about this conversation of consent, and we're talking about this conversation of power, the power structures and the dynamics that exist within that, it's really important to also talk about this is not just on a person to person basis. This affects the way in which we, as a culture, treat and react to really awful, vile things, and how much we care about that changes. Whether or not you're pretty, whether or not you are a person of color, whether or not you are skinny. And that's, I would love to not have that conversation as a reality, but I think denying that reality while we're talking about consent and talking about privilege would be foolish.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's absolutely here. It's absolutely here. And, forgive me, there's so many good things you're saying. I'm like, oh my God, let me catch up to the thoughts. You talked about devalued, like bodies that have been devalued. And that's so real, like to look at the numbers and to get that, like young girls of color, particularly Black girls, are sexually assaulted at higher rates.
Yep.
They get trafficked at pretty high rates. And there's like a disconnect of like the fact that these people are valuable. They get adultified in the criminal justice system. They are judged harshly, more harsh. And that's a part of the devaluing of bodies in the system. Like whether it's systemic, whether it's interrelational, like these are the conversations that we're really having.
Mm-hmm. And the understanding of consent then becomes like, if we're talking about the understanding of consent I actually just got goosebumps before I said this, on a legislative level, Texas. But really, because now we're not talking about it as a human to human thing, right, which is where I do believe it starts. But we're actually talking about the systems that are built to protect people. Right. That the systems themselves do not reflect equality or equitability. The systems themselves say you don't matter as much. Yeah. Consent to your body doesn't look the same.
Right. One of the things that you brought up was like, the world's not built for you. And if you live in a society where you are not experiencing like a certain amount of being ostracized, then the world is actually built for you, and that's a privilege you have to acknowledge. It's not in every arena. We all have privileges. We all have things where we feel unprivileged. And at the same time, if you're not recognizing that and using your agency and your power to do something about it, then you're perpetuating the system. Like,
yes. That right there, if there's one thing that everybody listening can walk away with, right, is that point right there. We like, oh gosh, just, yeah, if you are not aware of, like, it really just starts with awareness. And for me, right, so much of what I'm trying to build, right, the programs that I do and the event spaces that I center on, right, even this summit we're doing, it's about building the tools and the framework between this unconscious and this conscious pursuit. And consent as a, general understanding of yeses and nos, and did I blatantly bulldoze over someone's boundaries, exists in both. And for people that are able to just, I like what you said here, and I'll kind of like use my own way of reiterating it, is like, if you're navigating through the world frictionless, right? If there's no friction, just pause for a second and go, okay, what am I not knowing? What have I been privileged enough to not experience in this?
Yeah.
Right. And when we're talking about consent and the intimacy and asking people to be vulnerable and sharing their sexual expression and growth and expansion, it's really important. And the most powerful people, the people that I am drawn to, and the people that I really do feel will change the world, are the people that that really are able to understand that using your position of power, even if you too have, because everyone suffers, right? It's universal. It is still in recognizing where you still hold a position of power to elevate the voices of those who are not being heard or seen or represented, and to really create space. Like one of the co-founders, Misha, and also a men's coach, Misha Byrick, says, rolling out the red carpet for no. Like that piece right there, when we're talking about consent, it is so much more than this yes and no. It is about privilege. It is about the understanding of the nuances. It is about understanding where and challenging and, quite frankly, like decolonizing your own desires. And it is about still then, even then, after you've had all of that and you've sat and you've negotiated and you feel good about it, still then creating space for that no. Checking in on that no, thanking them. Oh, actually, you know what? Before we run out of time here, that's actually a huge one. How do you receive a no? It is not just about being strong enough and powerful enough and brave enough to give a no. And let me be clear, you are, because society hasn't given you that tool. So it's brave for you to even own your no in the first place.
Right.
But learning how to receive lovingly a no and realize what's going on in our bodies when we do, and be curious about what reactions are coming up for us and why those reactions are showing up. And if I can offer just a really easy tool to anybody listening, because receiving a no doesn't feel good, especially because so many of our understandings of and sense of self and value are tied to the opinions of others, is to simply thank the person for owning their no and for loving themselves. Because that's what they're doing. They're telling you no. Trust it's probably not easy for them.
Yeah.
And that's probably not about bravery and love. And it's not about you. And if anything, it is about you, in that they respect and love themselves enough to hold themselves in integrity in the face of your want and need. And that perspective shift, I want that to sink in, and it will be a practice, but eventually it will feel that way. Just like we were taught to feel that, ouch, oh God, when we get the no for something we really, really want, we relearn that, oh my God, wow. Like for me now, when certain people give me, especially people like on our team, if I get pushed back, I really do feel like, oh my God, thank you for that no. Like, because otherwise I would have moved forward. You and I would have gone and done this thing. I would have been thinking we are loving it and it feels good. But really I was overstepping your boundaries. I was pushing you out of alignment. I was asking you to abandon self, which meant, like you mentioned earlier, Nika, I don't want to do that to you. That feels awful for me. And so now really what we've done is we put all of ourselves in a situation where nobody really feels good. And that there's growth from that as well. But I really do think that that's an important tool. If someone says no, it's a gift.
It is.
And thank them for it.
That's beautiful. That's legitimate. So much so. And it's that we're not taught that.
No, I don't even
Oh,
know if I was like, were you ever given like, what do you say when somebody says no to you? Was that ever a conversation like in school or with your parents? Like, I cannot think of a single time
mm-mm.
where someone was to say, I mean, I got the lesson of like,
Oh,
life's tough, get a helmet.
yeah. What I got definitely was, if you're upset about a no, stop being upset. Like, you're gonna get in trouble because you're having a hissy fit or whatever is going on.
Yeah,
Like,
life's tough.
yeah,
You don't
yeah.
always get what you want.
And
God,
so
I've
then
never
it's
even thought about that. Wow, how deep seated is that? You don't always get what you want. That's like on a surface level, okay, fine, there's lessons in that. But what about when what I want is safety and
right,
choice and autonomy?
right. Huh. Oh my God. Okay, we could go on with this for a while because I had so many other thoughts. Like, we didn't touch on honesty. We didn't touch on like
We'll get it when I have you on
oh
Monday.
yeah.
We'll dig into it.
I love it. Yes. So please share, tell us a little bit about what you're bringing this weekend and the rest of the offerings and resources that you have.
Yes, yes, yes. So I actually did put together a landing page for this particular conversation just because I find it's a lot easier to just send to one place. So everything, including the resource for Betty, exists there. So that's not just sex stuff /itcast. And I'll just leave that up there for anybody who was watching, listening, or catches the replay. But to kind of touch on what information is available on there is the replays and links back to Nika's YouTube as well as Facebook page. And so this weekend, what we're doing, Nika was kind enough to invite me to join the Global Summit on sexual health and wellness. And so what I'm going to be focusing on is a workshop, hour and 15-minute workshop on the embodiment of the yeses and nos. And we're going to be doing a really individual workshop. So people have the opportunity to kind of learn what that looks like in their bodies. And we have a couple of different tools, both through like movement and also drawing to kind of work through different ways to understand that yes and no. And then we're doing my fun take on a sexy scavenger hunt, which is really more about discovering things inside of ourselves than anything else. So that's going to be this weekend. It's on the the conscious pursuit of desire is sexy, which is something that obviously I feel very strongly about. And then in January, we're going to be launching our love skills event, which is, I don't know how much, I don't want to go into too many detail. I don't want to derail things, but essentially it's right in line with everything that we're talking about here and what you're going to hear a lot about this weekend at the summit. It is a weekend centered around both in real life and also in-person workshops that are not just about, actually really not about sex at all. It's about going deeper around intimacy, deeper around desires, being able to be witnessed and to explore those edges and boundaries with trained professionals, therapists, coaches, DOMs, in a really safe container, and really focusing on the education and the integration that is so important in the self-discovery that happens inside of these play spaces. So yeah, all that information. I think that's all of it. And if I think of anything else, I'll make sure that we make it available to y'all when this goes live. But I think those are the big ones.
Yeah.
And yeah, if there's ever any questions or if anybody wants to connect, I'm always here for it. I love to collaborate. I love to have these conversations. So anytime.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And that's the Love Skills work series.
Yes, it's called Love Skills. Kind of a play on words a little bit, right? With the love kills. Just because it like, and that's somewhat intentional, right? Because we really are trying to dig into the fact that this stuff can be really harmful or it can be really transformative, but you got to be careful about where you fall on, which side you fall on. Yeah, and it will be so you can RSVP for it now for early bird tickets. There will be a limited amount of tickets that we sell. We do this intentionally just because of the nature of the workshops. We find that keeping them relatively small makes them more intimate and more impactful. So anybody who's interested in getting notified when the official launch of the event goes live, you can just RSVP with an email and you'll get a link as soon as that launches.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bridget. Thank you for being on the show and joining us and gracing us with this amazing conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Truly, like it's really powerful. And it inspires me when I meet other people fighting the good fight and on a similar mission. And I really just so appreciate that you are out here doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the ItCast Real Talk on Sex, our community outreach podcast that aims to increase diversity and conversations on health and sexuality. Through this work, we're creating a world where all people feel loved, honored, and respected. Do join us tomorrow, this weekend, for the Global Sexual Health and Freedom Summit. Learn more about that at sexhealthsummit.com. Come see Bridget, use the offer code NC10, and come be a part of the conversation on sacred sexuality. Last announcement. I am hosting a 6-week Tantra series that's starting on November 3rd. You can find information about that at our website as well. All right. Visit us on Patreon to support the ItCast and learn more at theitcast.com, and subscribe to this YouTube channel and share with your community. We will see you here next week.